Elbaf's final battle officially just began. This was the first action chapter of the final fight of the arc. And I just want to take a step back and say that this feels really surreal, considering Elbaf is an arc that has been hyped up for literally over 1,000 chapters at this point, going all the way back to Little Garden. We've kept on hearing about this island Elbaf over and over again, and here we are at the finish line of the long-awaited Elbaf storyline. And it has been a great arc so far. So let's get into talking about this chapter, because in this chapter, a lot of the matchups that I just talked about in last week's video that I said would be playing out over the course of the final battle seem to be clicking into place. And that starts with Zoro versus Dorian Brogy. So our opening scene of this chapter was, of course, Zoro against the various Dami Reversi giants. And we did get some clarification about how Dami Reversi works here, because I think I was a little bit unclear about it before, because I was under the assumption that only the giants of Elbaf could be Dami Reversi'd. I thought that's what Imu was getting at when he was asking who is the king of Elbaf. Then Imu declared that Dorian Brogy were the kings of Elbaf, and I thought that that set up a sort of subsequent chain where now Dorian Brogy, as the supposed kings of Elbaf, would cause the other giants of Elbaf to slowly turn into Imu's Dami Reversi'd slaves one by one. I did not realize that Dami Reversi simply seems to work on any individual that ends up between the giants who have already been Dami Reversi'd. So I'm happy that we got that clarification, but as Zoro showed us, there is an easy workaround, which is just don't get in between Dami Reversi'd giants. Now after Zoro took out the fodder giants, we got to Dorian Brogy attempting to attack Zoro, and this was the matchup that I previously predicted that Zoro would be fighting against both Dami Reversi'd Dorian Brogy. But at the moment, it is hard to say whether or not this is a matchup that is going to continue on after this chapter, or if it just resolved. Because Zoro gets out of the way of Dorian Brogy's attack, and Oda gives us a great callback. Like seriously, it's identical panels between this Dorian Brogy clash right here to their initial clash all the way back in Little Garden. But first, you can become your favorite admiral with the first ever Admiral hoodies. The Magma hoodie, the Ice hoodie, and the Light hoodie. And the best part is, for the official launch of the Admiral collection, this month, all hoodies are $80 off. And on top of that, if you buy 2 hoodies, you get the third one free. These are 100% cotton, multicolored jacquard hoodies made to order with patterns literally knitted directly into the fabric. And right over the heart, you have the embroidered devil fruit detail. All hoodies are made to order and will take some time to ship. So go get your hoodies right now while they're $80 off, and you can buy 2, get 1 free before the deal runs out. Just hit the link in the description below. So I really like that Oda did that, and it's also actually a little callback to Thriller Bark. I've been talking about a lot in recent videos how Elbaf really seems to parallel the plot of Thriller Bark. And in Thriller Bark, there were 2 zombies that Chopper and Robin were up against, who had the souls of Zoro and Sanji respectively placed in them. And Chopper and Robin were able to get around fighting these 2 characters because the Zoro zombie and the Sanji zombie ended up just fighting each other. So this Dorian Brogy clash between what should be 2 of Imu's puppets seems like a throwback to Thriller Bark again in a sense. But of course, it remains to be seen whether or not Dorian Brogy continue to duke it out from here. Because really, there are 4 options that come out of this scenario. The simplest option is that Dorian Brogy just straight up took each other out in this single blow. If that's the case, it's likely that Zoro's attention will be diverted and he will go participate in the fight against Killingham. I still maintain, as I talked about in my last matchups video, that Killingham is an opponent that is reserved for Usopp, but it is likely that Usopp will be needing help against Killingham, especially as Usopp doesn't technically have a way to damage Killingham, so maybe Zoro coming in to help in that fight could make a lot of sense. And this also applies to the second option that comes out of the Dorian Brogy scenario, which is that Dorian Brogy perhaps did not take each other out just straight up with this single blow, but they're gonna get back up, be pissed at each other, and that will actually override Imu's control over them, and they will just continue to battle each other for the rest of Elbaf till this plotline resolves. And I think Oda might like to do that just because that's the way that Oda often likes to do things, and that would again be a callback to Little Garden with their centuries-long duel. Now the third option with the Dorian Brogy situation is that Dorian Brogy are not actually defeated from this single blow, and they're not going to continue fighting each other, rather they will get up and turn their attention to Zoro. And if that's the case, it's possible that Oda had Dorian Brogy wound each other so that they're both a little bit weakened to make the fight a bit more fair for Zoro, since it is 2-on-1 after all against 2 legendary warriors who have been amplified beyond their normal abilities. And now the final and most terrifying possibility is that Dami Reversi, Dorian Brogy will actually recover from their wounds, as well as the rest of the surrounding giants that Zoro seemingly just took out. Now, so far, Dami Reversi has not actually shown the ability to heal and regenerate from any wounds like the Gods Knights have shown. However, we also don't have a very large sample size of what Dami Reversi entails. If we go back to Rox, when he was Dami Reversi'd, it's true that we never saw him regenerating from any wounds, but it was also established that Rox's Conqueror's Haki coating that surrounded his body was simply so strong that Roger and Garp actually just straight up couldn't even deal any damage to him in the first place. So for the majority of Rox's battle against Roger and Garp, there was nothing for Rox to regenerate from. It was only Roger and Garp's final combined all-out Conqueror's Haki attack team move that finally overcame Rox's own coating and defeated him. But it's possible that that move was so strong that even if Dami Reversi did grant Rox regeneration, that Roger and Garp's Haki simply overcame that. So we actually have yet to get definitive proof whether or not Dami Reversi does or does not also grant regeneration, like the packs that Imu gives the Gods Knights and the Gorosei do. I personally think it would be borderline unfair if Dami Reversi also gave that regeneration, but at the same time, maybe that is what is needed right now for Zoro as a challenge, because Zoro really does need to get control over his Conqueror's Haki, as Gaban recently pointed out, and having to fight two characters like Dorian Brogy who are capable of regenerating from their wounds would really back Zoro into a corner where he would just absolutely have to get his Conqueror's Haki down if he wants to put these two giants down. Now, that scene aside, the really interesting scene of this chapter was of course between Brook and Gunko. Or should I say Princess Shuri, now that that whole past is slowly being revealed. So this scene and this general plot thread is extremely important to the story of Elbaf. Tomorrow's video is actually going to be a deep dive on the situation, because it holds the key to how the entire plot of Elbaf is set to be resolved. So definitely watch out for that video, but I'll touch on a few topics right here. So to begin with, the fact that Brook harbors a deep-seated dislike for Princess Shuri because of what she supposedly did to her father, with Brook calling her the patricidal princess, that kind of clicks into place how this Brook-Gunko storyline fits with the overall Elbaf narrative. Because these accusations that Gunko committed patricide is an exact parallel to the accusations that have been levied against Loki for so many years, only for it to finally be proven that Loki is in fact innocent and he did not kill his father out of cold blood. That of course has huge implications for Gunko's true storyline and what actually happened in her past, and potentially sets her up to be an extremely tragic figure. Because based on what little we've seen of her memories, I believe that unlike Loki, who did voluntarily take the blame for his father's death upon himself, I have a suspicion that Gunko, aka Shuri, did not voluntarily choose to take those accusations upon herself, but rather she was misframed, most likely as part of Imu's manipulation, to seem like she killed her father in cold blood. So I think Shuri's story may be even sadder than Loki's in that regard. But the most important thing that we saw in this scene was that the memories of Brook and Gunko's general interactions with Brook were actually triggering enough for her that it allowed her to gain some control over her body back from Imu. That is an absolutely huge plot point. As it turns out, Brook is going to have a shocking level of significance in this storyline. But in retrospect, it actually does make a lot of sense, because as I've been talking about in many past videos, again, Elbaf does have very strong parallels to Thriller Bark, and as we all know, Thriller Bark was Brook's arc. But again, wait for tomorrow's video for my full breakdown of what I am talking about here. And then the last little setup we get from that scene is Sanji arriving in the nick of time, most likely to help Robin free herself from Somers' thorns. And as I talked about again in the most recent video, Sanji versus Somers is maybe the matchup that I'm most looking forward to coming up in Elbaf, because Somers really seems to have been written as the perfect antithesis to Sanji. All of Somers' views on love and on women are basically the exact opposite of Sanji, so I'm really looking forward to seeing these two characters clash, and that hopefully being an avenue for Sanji awakening some latent Conqueror's Haki. But regardless of whether or not Sanji gets a fight against Somers, Somers' fate is pretty much sealed after the Elbaf arc, because Somers just continues to mess things up for Imu and the Gods Knights in general. Gerd, Goldberg, and Roto do a team attack, the classic giant team attack of launching a cannon. It destroys one of Killingham's big creations, but then Somers knocks it onto the escape ship. This is honestly just an insane level of incompetency. I'm genuinely curious why Oda had Somers just make this mistake, instead of having, some of the good guys just destroy the ship to foil their plans. I think it's a really interesting choice that Oda said that no, none of the good guys are just going to go out of their way to destroy the ship. I'm actually going to make it so that Somers just straight up messes up and foils their own plans. Maybe Oda just likes the gag, maybe Oda wants to do another scene of divine retribution like Imu did to Saturn. But if that is to come for Somers, again, that will likely come at the end of the arc after a battle with Sanji. As I've talked about in past videos, I personally think that the three Gods Knights that we have here, between Somers, Killingham, and Gunko, are not going to be Gods Knights in the final war. At this point, I think Gunko is going to be freed, and I think Killingham and Somers are set to be punished by Imu and basically erased off of the Gods Knights roster, which potentially opens up some more spots for interesting new Gods Knights in the final war, because as we remember, this whole Elbaf storyline actually began with the Gods Knights offering Loki a spot in the Gods Knights, meaning that they are trying to do some recruiting right now before the grand finale of the story. But I will talk more on that in future videos. And finally, we have a comment from the Voice of the People, my top tier of patrons. So Dice said that it's weird of Oda to do the alleged father killer again back to back like this. I'm immensely curious as to his narrative/thematic plans for this. Hopefully it's not redundant. So again, I touch on this more in tomorrow's video, but I'll just say two things, which is that I think that this is actually one of the smartest routes that Oda could have gone to really tie a lot of what Oda's doing in Elbaf together. To begin with, the Elbaf arc in general centers around the theme of fatherhood quite a bit. And so this other recurring idea of patricide, first with Loki, the patricidal prince, and now with Shuri, the patricidal princess, plays into some of Oda's broader ideas with fatherhood that he's been writing throughout the arc, but you'll have to wait for the end of the arc to get all my thematic breakdown on that. But all I would say for the moment is that I don't think that this is Oda being redundant. Rather, the important thing that we need to remember right now is that Brook actually believes the accusations that have been levied against Shuri, which means that Brook needs to somehow find out the truth before the end of this arc, as presumably Shuri is innocent. And that's where I think Loki's story will likely come in, because from understanding Loki's story, I think Brook might be able to put together some of the pieces as to what happened with Shuri and her father. And I believe that realization will lead to the most important moment of the arc, and the most important moment for Brook as a character in this story so far, period. But to understand what I mean by that, watch out for tomorrow's video. Overall, I'm giving this chapter a 7.5 out of 10, and I'm really excited to see what this battle snowballs into. So with that, I will talk to you all later.